Ancient Rome is often romanticized as a cradle of civilization, a place of grandeur, innovation, and cultural sophistication. From its awe-inspiring architecture to its complex legal systems, Rome's influence on the modern world is undeniable. However, beneath the veneer of glory lies a society with practices and norms that would shock the modern conscience. Many aspects of daily life in ancient Rome, which were considered completely normal at the time, would be seen as bizarre, cruel, or even barbaric by today's standards. Here are some of the most shocking things that were normal in ancient Rome. Gladiatorial combat entertainment. Through bloodshed, one of the most iconic yet disturbing aspects of ancient Roman culture was the gladiatorial games. These were not just casual spectacles, but massive public events held in grand amphitheaters like the Colosseum, where thousands of Romans gathered to watch enslaved people, prisoners of war, or criminals fight to the death. Gladiators were trained in combat and often pitted against each other or wild animals in brutal, bloody battles. What's shocking is that these fights were seen as a form of entertainment, not unlike modern-day sports. The crowd would cheer, bet on outcomes, and even demand the death of a defeated gladiator by giving a thumbs-down signal. While some gladiators achieved fame and even freedom, most died young and in agony. The normalization of such violence as public entertainment is a stark reminder of how differently life and death were valued in ancient Rome. Slavery was deeply ingrained in Roman society and was considered a normal and necessary institution. Enslaved people were not just laborers, but also teachers, doctors, and household servants. They were property, with no legal rights, and could be bought, sold, or punished at their owner's whim. The treatment of enslaved people varied widely. Some lived relatively comfortable lives, while others endured unimaginable cruelty. What's particularly shocking is the scale of slavery in Rome. At its peak, it's estimated that enslaved people made up about 30–40% of the population. Entire economies depended on their labor, from agriculture to mining. Rebellions, such as the famous uprising led by Spartacus, were brutally suppressed. The normalization of slavery in Rome highlights the stark inequalities of the time and the dehumanization of those considered inferior. Public baths, or thermae, were a central part of Roman social life. These were not just places to get clean, but also hubs for socializing, conducting business, and even exercising. While the idea of communal bathing might not seem shocking today, the level of nudity and lack of privacy in Roman baths would likely make modern people uncomfortable. Men and women often bathed together, and nudity was completely normalized. The baths were also places where sexual activity sometimes occurred, blurring the lines between public and private life. Additionally, the baths were not always hygienic by modern standards. The water was rarely changed, and diseases could spread easily. This casual attitude toward nudity and hygiene reflects a very different cultural mindset from today's norms. Lead poisoning as a culinary delight. The Romans were unknowingly poisoning themselves on a massive scale due to their use of lead in everyday life. Lead was used in everything from plumbing, the word plumber comes from the Latin plumbum, meaning lead, to cookware, and even as a sweetening agent in wine and food. The Romans loved the taste of sapa, a syrup made by boiling grape juice in lead pots, which gave it a sweet flavor. What's shocking is that this widespread use of lead likely contributed to widespread lead poisoning, which can cause severe health problems, including cognitive impairment, infertility, and even death. Some historians speculate that lead poisoning may have played a role in the decline of the Roman Empire, as it affected the ruling class disproportionately. The normalization of such a toxic substance in daily life is a chilling reminder of the dangers of ignorance. Infanticide and abandonment in ancient Rome. The father, paterfamilias, had absolute authority over his household, including the power of life and death over his children. It was not uncommon for newborns to be abandoned or killed if they were deemed unwanted, whether due to illegitimacy, deformity, or simply because the family could not afford another mouth to feed. This practice, known as exposure, involved leaving the infant in a public place where they might be rescued by strangers or left to die. What's shocking is how casually this practice was accepted. While some abandoned children were taken in as slaves or raised by others, many perished. The normalization of infanticide reflects the harsh realities of life in a society where survival often took precedence over morality. Sexual exploitation and prostitution. Sexual norms in ancient Rome were vastly different from today's standards. Prostitution was legal and widespread, and enslaved people were often forced into the sex trade. Brothels were common, and sexual services were advertised openly. What's shocking is the lack of stigma attached to these practices, at least for men. For women, however, societal expectations were much stricter, and female sexuality was tightly controlled. Additionally, pederasty, sexual relationships between adult men and adolescent boys, was socially acceptable in certain contexts, particularly among the elite. This normalization of exploitative sexual practices reflects the deeply patriarchal and unequal nature of Roman society.